Good afternoon, everyone. I extend a very warm welcome to you all to the 11th KC Basu Endowment Lecture hosted by the West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences. This is an annual lecture instituted by Padma Bhushan Dr. Kaushik Basu, Senior Vice President and Chief Economist, World Bank, in the memory of his father, late Sri Keshav Chandra Basu, who was an eminent lawyer and a politician of repute in post-independence Bengal. In 2002, the university had set up the KC Basu Memorial Lecture on Law and Economics, and since then, the university has been organizing lecture series every year by inviting distinguished scholars from across the world. The event has been graced in the past by stalwarts like Professor Amartya Sen, Professor Pranab Vardhan, Mr. N.R. Narayana Murthy, Joseph Stiglitz, Lord Professor Meghnad Desai, and other renowned scholars. The last endowment lecture was delivered by Lawrence Lian. This is the 11th endowment lecture that we are organizing today. This year we have with us, to grace the occasion, Professor Dr. M GoviNDA RAO, who will be delivering a lecture on reviving investment and sustaining high growth, need to build state capacity. Thank you once again. Today we have with us on the dais, presiding over today's ceremony, Honorable Justice Chittatosh Mukherjee, former Chief Justice, High Court at Calcutta and High Court at Bombay. We will be shortly having with us distinguished scholar Professor Amyo Kumar Bagchi, Professor of Economics and Director, Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata, as the guest of honor. We also have with us Dr. V. Sudesh Pai, Chair Professor, Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee Chair, established by the Government of West Bengal, and eminent Senior Advocate, High Court at Karnataka. We have with us Registrar Dr. Sarfaraz Ahmed Khan, Registrar WBNUJS. I heartily welcome them all. Now may I request Dr. Mercy Kaute to kindly come up on the dais and felicitate our dignitaries. May I now request Dr. V. Sudesh Pai to formally welcome the gathering.
Dear Justice Chittatosh Mukherjee, esteemed Professor GoviNDA RAO, Honorable Registrar, distinguished members of the faculty, students, invitees and friends. I am deeply sensible of the honor of this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to the 11th Keshav Chandra Basu Endowment Lecture. A most hearty welcome to Justice Chittatosh Mukherjee, who needs no introduction to this institution. He has been with the university since its very inception. I have great pleasure in extending to you, sir, a very warm welcome. The endowment speaker of this afternoon, Professor GoviNDA RAO, is an eminent economist and was a member of the 14th Finance Commission that finished its tenure very recently. Professor Rao's credentials in the field of economics are internationally known and recognized. I have great pleasure in extending to you, sir, a very hearty welcome. Professor Amiya Kumar Bagchi, who has just come in, is the guest of honor this evening, a distinguished economist and Professor Emeritus of the Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata. May I formally extend to you, sir, a very hearty welcome. A most cordial welcome to all the faculty and students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I would request Professor Kaute once again to kindly felicitate Professor Amiya Kumar Bagchi. We have with us Dr. M GoviNDA RAO, who was a member of the 14th Finance Commission. Prior to that, he was the Director, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, Director, Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore, and Fellow, Research School of Pacific and Asian Studies, Australian National University. He was a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, member of Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission, member High-Level Expert Committee on Universal Health Coverage, member High-Level Expert Committee on Efficient Management of Public Expenditure. His research interests include tax policy and reforms, public expenditure management, state and local finance, fiscal decentralization and federalism. We are delighted to have you here with us, sir. May I request Dr. Rao to kindly address the gathering and begin the lecture.
Revered Justice, Honorable Justice Chitatush Mukherjee, highly respected Professor Amiya Kumar Bagchi, indeed a great pleasure to be here and to be delivering a memorial lecture in honor of Mr. Basu. I have not had the occasion to meet Mr. Basu, but I've been a great friend of Dr. Kaushik Basu, and in fact I have met his mother as well, because all of them were invited by, as a V.K. Rao professor at Institute for Social and Economic Change when I was the director, and we have had a lot of exchanges there afterwards, and particularly when he was in the Ministry of Finance as the Chief Economic Advisor. And he wrote to me to say that he is very glad that I shall be delivering the lecture, and I am extremely grateful to the university for inviting me to. I'm actually honored and to deliver this lecture this afternoon. Particularly as I see, in fact for 10 years we have had very, very eminent people delivering the lecture. I do hope this is not going to be one of those, changing trends. Certainly I do not come up to the levels of some of the people who have delivered the lecture. But I deem it a very honor and nevertheless to deliver the lecture this evening. I'm going to be talking about some of the recent things that have happened in India. Basically, the reviving the investment climate in India, which is being, which has shown a secular decline right from 2007-2008, and in fact, you see, one is faced with a number of constraints, some of them relating to the capacity of the state itself. Quite a lot of this capacity constraint comes from the special interest groups. Therefore, I would like to refer to some of those issues. There are some of the things we'll come to, as I said, are in the realm of law and economics. These gadgets are always a problem. Well, India has grown at more than 6% consistently for over 2.5 decades. Yet there has been a deceleration in the core growth since the second quarter of 2000. No, in fact, if one sees for the last 15 years itself, there is a growth of more than something like 7.5%. But since the second quarter of 2016-17, there has been a deceleration in the growth of the economy, furthermore, even as employment, even as the economy has grown, the employment growth has lagged behind, and in fact, employment velocity of growth has been actually declining. Now, in fact, we have been taking pride in saying that we are the fastest growing economy, or etc., etc. But there is always this question of what is your, the many people believe that the potential growth is much higher than the actual growth that we have seen, and and that's because of several constraints that you have done. When the median age of the population is 24 years. In 2011, more than 49% of the population is below 24 years. We have been talking about demographic dividends, and over 135 million people will be added to the work. It is estimated that over 135 million people will be added from 2011 to 2030. Human development and employment creation are the great challenges, and then we really have to address them. The recent trends indicate a slowdown in growth mainly caused by the decline in investment. I'll come to that in a little. I'll come to that, in some detail a little later. The investment climate has shown a steady deterioration right from 2008-9. Of course, some people will attribute it to global financial crisis, but I think much of it has been done because of our own domestic policies. The highest, the gross domestic capital formation was over 38% in 2007-8, and subsequently in 2016-17, it is estimated at 27.1%. I'm afraid I'm using one of the earlier ones, so let me. So if you really look at it, it's not really the global environment or the global, but the domestic policies that have been responsible in the main for the slowdown in the investment. As I mentioned, the highest gross domestic capital formation was over 37% in 2007-8, and in 2016-17 it is estimated at 27.1%. The last quarter gross domestic capital formation, that means that was released a couple of days ago, it is just about 26.4%. even as we say that the growth has revived, the GDCF has been showing a declining trend. It's not the global environment, as I mentioned. Now there is a major question that we talk about. When the markets fail, we say that the government should intervene. But what happens when the governments fail? Now, how do we prevent the government failure? I mean, certainly the market is not an answer to government failures. We need to find ways, we need to create checks and balances for the governments to function the way they should. Now, when we look at the way the Indian economy has moved, there have been several cases of government failure. And it is here that we need really a system of checks and balances put in place so that the governments are made to function. As I mentioned, recent growth experience shows that there has been a deceleration in the growth since March 16th quarter. That means the second, so the GDP growth of 7.1% in 2016-17 has come out to 8% in the previous year. Gross value added, which is a much more relevant variable for comparison, it was 6.6% versus 7.79% in the previous year. The last quarter gross value added in 2016-17 was, and the first quarter 2017 was 5.6%. Now they say that in the latest, the numbers released 2 days ago, they say that it is marginally recovered to 6.1%. Recovery was mainly due to recovery in manufacturing as the impact of demonetization and goods and services tax seems to have waned a little. But this is not completely true because I think the national accounts, in fact the quarterly estimates of GDP do not really take into account the impact of demonetization on the small scale sector because the numbers are not coming. They basically take the information from the Minister of Corporate Affairs on the manufacturing sector and extrapolate for the small scale sector. And in normal times that is okay, but then in a situation where there have been such serious disruptions, the growth numbers are doubtful. But nevertheless, they say that the economy has turned around and the gross value added is 6.1%. If you look at the sources of growth, it is only the private consumption that is kicking. Government consumption has increased in the wake of pay commission implementation, but going further, it's not going to be one of those engines that will kick up growth. Government investment was front loaded, and of course now there are some issues to which I will return. Exports are not likely to pick up anytime soon, though there is a global, to some extent there is a global recovery. As I mentioned, the gross domestic capital formation has shown a secular decline from 37% in 2008 to 26.4% in the second quarter of 2017-18. Private investment has steadily declined. In fact, corporate investment by top 1,000 non-financial firms was the slowest in the last 25 years, up just by 5.8%. Previous low was in 1999 after the dot-com bubble. Now there are downside risks. The decline in the gross domestic capital formation, that is a major issue. So obviously, given the incremental capital output ratio, it's not going to it's not going to really accelerate the growth. In fact, decline in investment is a major issue that is faced by the economy today. Now, one of the things that happens at this particular time is to increase the government investment. But the fiscal deficit numbers are already 96% for the year of the targeted numbers for the year, and so obviously, unless and until they breach the fiscal deficit numbers, they are not going to they cannot increase the capital limit, or unless they're able to dig up a lot more of taxes from the so-called doubtful cases which were thrown up after the demonetization, which is very, very doubtful. In fact, most of them will end up in courts. Given the fact that there is a global recovery, the interest rates abroad, in United States is showing upward trend, and in this particular environment, and then the oil prices are showing an upward trend. The general price level is showing upward trend. In fact, on December 6th, the RBI is going, the Monetary Policy Committee is going to deliberate. It is unlikely that they are going to change the interest rates. As I said, oil prices from somewhere about less than $50 a barrel a year ago is today $63 a barrel. Exports continue to be slow. In fact, the issue of current account deficit might crop up as we go along. On the positive side, disruption is marginally disruption on account of two major policy changes. The demonetization and the introduction of GST is to an extent on the way, though the small scale industries continues to suffer on both counts. Global recovery is a positive thing, but to what extent India can make use of that, we will like to see. The policy of recapitalization of banks might, start, if it, depending upon how the company law, the tribunal works, to what extent, sort of they are able to resolve the issue of the 12 major cases that have been referred to them by the Reserve Bank of India. Now, that will determine, but then, it's only in the medium term. In the short term, we are stuck. So this is a sort of a growth scenario from March 16 to September 17-18. You see that there is a continuous decline in the growth gross value added as well as in the core value added but the core value added has started picking up. Core value added, that is gross value added minus the agriculture and the public administration. Anyway, so let me go to why there is this poor investment climate. There are both the transitional and structural factors. Demonetization and GST are the transitional factors, and to an extent they will have a permanent impact too. In fact, many of the small businesses have simply been wiped out. It is unlikely that, on both counts, and it is unlikely that they will come back into the reckoning soon. Now, as for the structural factors, the major issue that we are faced with is what we call the twin balance sheet crisis. I'll come to that in a little while. The twin balance sheet crisis has resulted in the banks are reluctant to lend, and borrowers are reluctant to borrow. The industry is reluctant to borrow. There has always been a mismatch. Banks only take short-term funds. In fact, the deposits that they collect are for, the time deposits are not for a long period. But they are making investment for 15-year, 20-year infrastructure investments and things like that. So there is a mismatch in the very nature of the thing. So you do need to have corporate bond market developed if you really want to have an institution to do long-term lending, which you don't have. The non-performing asset situation, gross non-performing assets was 7.8% for all loans in March 16. It increased to 9.1% in September. Public sector banks, it increased from 10% to 11.8%. Large borrowers accounted for 56% of the loans in scheduled commercial banks, and they contributed to 88.4% of the non-performing assets. Large borrowers, the Reserve Bank defines as those borrowers who are borrowing more than 5 crores. Reasons? Now it's very easy to blame the banks, but then quite a lot of it is because of the government itself. There was a policy flux. There was a bad way of, there were problems with the spectrum allocation. So all the telecom licenses were cancelled. There was a problem with coal mine allocation. Coal mines allocation was cancelled. Now the people who took the coal mines, particularly the steel and manufacturers of steel and power, who borrowed heavily from the market and made investment in these, now suddenly found out that the rug has been dragged, taken out of their feet, dragged out of their feet, and they see that so they are saddled with huge loans, but then they don't have the coal because the coal mines were cancelled. The same thing. I mean, in fact, 2007-8 was so there was so much of exuberance in the economy. In 2007-8, the economy was growing continuously for a period of more than 9, for 3 years, for more than 9%. In fact, many in the public-private partnerships borrowed very heavily, particularly for roads, and even instead of asking for the viability gap funding, these people said that they will give the money to the government and they took the contracts. But then government failed to get them the land clearance. So even if you complete 3/4 of the highway, if you even a small part, if it is not completed, the highway cannot be functional, you can't charge tolls. So there have been problems of that nature. So there is a policy flux, cronyism in allocation. There is also politicization of financial institutions. Vijay Mallya could go about borrowing money because of his political patronage. Now there was one question that I always asked to ask. The Reserve Bank of India is the regulator. The government owns majority of the banks. Government is the regulator because Reserve Bank is this thing. And is there something like a conflict of interest at all in our system? Okay. Now many of these the public sector banks, there is a nominee of the finance ministry in the board. There is a nominee of Reserve Bank of India in the board. If these people were doing wrong things, what were they doing? If they are lending to wrong set of people, what were they doing? Why is it that they are not asked to, why is that there is no accountability on these government nominees and RBI nominees in the public sector banks? When we keep saying that the public sector banks, one, don't have the capacity, number two, they have been politically influenced. But what exactly are we talking about? Now I remember in Rural Electrification Corporation, there was one, I used to be a board member. They came up with a loan proposal of 12,000 crores for Tamil Nadu Electricity Board. I said, why is this loan? Why do you want 12,000 crores loan to be given to Tamil Nadu Electricity Board? The government representative in the board, the joint secretary of the ministry, said, no, this is, it's a government thing, it doesn't matter, we will have to give because they have to do this investment. I said, how much of this 12,000 crores is for investment? Finally, it turned out that 9,000 crores, they had to repay the loan. So you give 12,000 crores so that they repay 9,000 and 3,000 they take it. This is called evergreening of the loans. We have gone on doing this evergreening of the loans. And at some point of time so I said I am not going to sign it. And there was a similar proposal for Rajasthan. I said I am not going to sign it. And I did not sign it. But it so happened that, I had to resign from the board because I became member of the Finance Commission. And they approved the loan and then that went up. What happened in Rural Electrification Corporation, which is basically a non-banking finance company, or Power Finance Corporation, has happened with the public sector banks. Evergreening of the loan on political authority. And then of course, now today we have risk-averse bankers. They don't want to lend at all. Because if they don't lend, they will not be held responsible. If they lend, they will be held responsible. Why would they lend? Now there is this insolvency and bankruptcy code. A lot of the things are being touted about this. Will it solve the problem? RBI has taken the initiative. There have been insolvency proceedings against 12 companies accounting for 25% bad loans. Now there are a number of conflict of interest issues I don't want to go into, but will we be able to resolve the issue? I mean, in fact, if they are able to resolve one major this thing, I think the sentiment will improve. But in the meantime, the same promoters of the companies who borrowed money want to bid for the new the bad assets, and so the government has come out with the law saying that these people should be barred. There is a lot of controversy. Some people say that, look, I mean, they have put blood and sweat in creating that company. Now you are barring them. Why would you do that? By having them, you will have more competition and possibly better this thing. There are others who say that they have actually bled the company and they have no business to continue. Anyway.